Sounds good to me.
Well, thanks for everyone who is outside of the ground floor family for joining us today. This is our May Artist Talk for our show Intersections that is curated by artist and educator Jason Tanner Young. Jason's joining us today. This is an all member, all artist show, meaning that this was a show that we do annually every year. And normally it's a full building exhibition. But with the pandemic, we kind of just shrunk it down into being one small space. And it was really incredible to see everybody's work together like that. So I'm going to turn it over to Tanner now, and he's going to talk a little bit about his work and his ideas and his practice as a curator as well. All right.
Well, I just want to start off by, thanking everybody at Ground Floor, especially for inviting me to, come into your studios physically, but also virtually, and kind of look at work in process and talk about ideas. But I think it's just really exciting kind of being a part of that sort of creative process, from talking to the artists and kind of envisioning an idea or theme for the show. And thinking about the show, just kind of just doing a kind of a recap, kind of thinking about the process that we kind of went through as we were kind of working toward the show, or thinking about a theme that the artists could kind of fit into in terms of a group show. And I came up with the idea of intersections. I guess it's been a while ago now. We originally had the idea of having the show, I guess a little over a year ago, before the pandemic. And so I kind of visited with artists then. And then several months ago, visited with artists again, as we had to kind of put a pause on the show and then come back. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's been a really interesting experience, from talking to everyone and then waiting about a year or so, and then talking again with folks. And so I feel like I was really kind of dialed in to some of their ideas, or what was kind of happening in the studio. And I think that that's kind of what it's all about, those sort of conversations. And with the sort of show statement that we sent out to all the artists to kind of think about as they were working on pieces or thinking about artwork for the show, the statement reads that I wrote is: as artists, we often work with multiple materials and ideas, celebrating the moments of impact when disparate things converge. I'm interested in that junction, the overlapping of two or more routes that coincide and for a short time exist in the same space. In this exhibition, I'm interested in the physical, the metaphorical, and conceptual intersections. So I'm kind of really interested in that sort of overlapping. And then a little bit about myself. I currently am teaching at the University of Montevallo, where I teach sculpture. And I got my BFA from the University of Texas at Tyler. And I got my MFA from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. And then after getting my MFA, we moved to Athens, Ohio, and I had a position there at Ohio University for about 4.5 years or so. I taught in sculpture and expanded practice. And I also was like the woodshop and sculpture technician too. So did that for a little bit. And then from there, started teaching sculpture at the University of Montevallo. And I've been in the area now for 5 years. So this is my 5th academic year that I have completed here at the University of Montevallo, which isn't too far from Birmingham, not too far of a drive. So kind of give a little bit of context. And, kind of thinking about like the work a little bit too, and kind of thinking about some of the artists that are in the show. I just kind of wanted to mention, I guess, about 4 or 5 people that kind of came to mind, kind of maybe within the idea of coming within the idea of like intersections. And two, I'm kind of guilty of thinking about working, thinking about the artist's work, but then thinking about things that I'm excited about in my studio practice too. And a lot of times when I teach, I kind of teach, and I also sort of tell stories too in the teaching. So it's not digressing. It makes sense to me, but I don't know if I'll go venture off into that at all. But I was thinking about, this image that we can see here. I was thinking about Liza's landscapes that she's painting. I guess it's a diptych or maybe 2 pieces. But think what's interesting about her and her work, you know, referencing a landscape or being referential of a landscape, um, to me, just kind of reading it sort of as a curator and then kind of speaking to her in her studio or looking at the work and process in the studio um, with Eliza's work, you know, to me, it kind of seems like they sort of seem like internal landscapes in a way. Thinking about this idea or kind of a flickering in between the real and imagined. Um, and I really appreciated the gestural sort of qualities of the paint. And kind of thinking about intersections or this overlapping, like the way the roots are kind of like layering over these sort of geological, I guess, sort of uplifts, right? This sort of bluff that's on the bottom. But they're kind of these interesting sort of like mental spaces or mental landscapes. That the top piece, there's a small building that's kind of referential of architecture, but maybe sort of metaphorical for something else. Not that it was a real thing. Or imaginary thing. I guess when I'm talking about like within a landscape or thinking about landscapes, you know, I think about sort of history of landscape painting or like thinking about a landscape, but I think so much of that sort of takes place in the mind or kind of thinking about memory. I'm thinking about my work too. Um, I've always sort of been interested in sort of these in navigating by landmarks or sort of these like internal landmarks that I go back and kind of visit in my mind, thinking about like a bridge that was sort of by my parents' house and kind of a silo. And I know I'm kind of putting my baggage into the work, but I kind of think it's interesting. I think about this with art and sculpture too, that like art kind of happening kind of in between spaces, these things that are real, but also sort of imagine, like kind of embracing that process and investigation and journey through materials. Like to me, it doesn't seem like it's straight rendering. I mean, we artists, you know, I think some use source materials from images that they're painting from, or they might use Photoshop. But to me, this very much looks like it's about looking and perceiving, but maybe kind of letting the work tell you where it needs to go to. Like there's kind of a fluidity when I think about like a Diebenkorn painting, like kind of like dragging through and kind of like smearing and layering that I appreciate the kind of to me, the kind of speed in which this work is made is interesting too. I think that's kind of hard to do, but like some things are quick, and then maybe some things are kind of dialed in. I think about a lot of contemporary art, kind of having that sort of juggling act. And then I was thinking about Lauren Francis Evans' work. I'll give you a second to find that one. Yeah. Um, I just thought this was a really kind of uncanny piece. And, you know, when I see it, you know, I definitely think of like cradling, or I think of like, you know, something being held, or I think of the idea of like a womb or this idea of like nurturing, right? Um, but when I look at the sort of the wool hands too, you know, there's something that's sort of uncanny about it. Even, you know, I'd say this work is sort of surreal, definitely. You know, whenever you see like fur or like hair, you know, you definitely think about a mammal, right? So I guess it's very mammal in a way, which sounds kind of strange to say, but I remember at the gallery opening, we were talking about some of Robert Gober's work. And I think I told a story about an Elvis impersonator that was from Blooming Grove, Texas, that wasn't far from my family's house. But you know that I think this is kind of really getting into some interesting territory. I think about like Oppenheim's fur-lined teacup as well too. So I like that this work is kind of like, you know, being honest. I think to like being a parenthood or being a mother, right? Being an artist. But also I think like sort of these nods or references maybe to like the Oppenheim or the fur-lined teacup is interesting too. I was thinking about some of Anita's work. Um, I, you know, spoke to her a little over a year ago, and I think we were in a Sarah's studio, and she had 30 or 40 of these that we kind of put them on the floor of the studio, and we're kind of moving them around. And we were doing that again in the gallery space too. their ground floor. And these are newer, I think these are new pieces, so I don't even think they're a year old. But what I really appreciated about this work was, I think we're talking about like a sensitivity to a place or environment. And I kind of talked about the thing that, the thing gets better through the making, right? Or art gets better through the making, I feel like, in terms of being a maker. And I kind of talked about this idea of kind of like the real or the imagined, or kind of taking the work where it needs to go. I like that this is a lot about drawing. And there's some areas of these drawings, I guess they're watercolor too, painting, but there's some areas, I'm taking my mouse and moving it around, but I realize I'm not sharing my screen. But anyhow, I'm pointing to the one in the upper left hand. But I think that there's some nice gestural qualities where the line work is kind of being left. I always appreciated like drawing, or you think about drawing too, kind of like seeing the kind of the potential or kind of that vulnerability. A lot of times when I think about painting, I see, I had a friend that makes these really beautiful paintings, and I always like his work when it's like 30% finished. Like he has these really large canvases, and he's got these really kind of faint linear kind of line work, these sort of gestural drawings. And you kind of see where he's gone in and corrected things and kind of fixed proportions and stuff like that. But I kind of feel like every line that you make is a decision. And I think there's really beauty in line work. And I'm always telling him that, the viewer, they have an imagination, right? You can leave parts out and then put parts in, right? So what's there is important, but what's not there is just as important. And some artists, maybe it's even more important, right? Or you think about like maybe negative space as sort of like a real space, right? But I think Anita's work has this nice kind of push and pull, where, and I think working in watercolor does that too. I was surprised when I was doing watercolor paintings in undergrad. I remember I just wanted to completely soak the canvas with paint. But a lot of it's about leaving like the substrate or the paper showing. It's sort of like painting with the stain in a way, with how it absorbs the paper, or at least that's how I interpreted it. So I kind of think making a successful, sort of captivating watercolor is actually really a challenge. And I think that just seeing the work with elements that are kind of linear and left open, with the drawing to the paint, I just really appreciated that. And I think the scale, there are these nice intimate, I think that there are these small intimate pieces that she's doing. But I really like these in a grid too. And I like, this one sort of being placed horizontally on the bottom left to kind of throw it off, where it's a little bit asymmetrical. Like formally, I'm kind of responding to that too. Maybe kind of thinking about like intersections, right? Or parallel, perpendicular. But I think, I really liked just kind of seeing the progression of Anita's work. And, I was even talking to her at the opening. Not that more is always better. I think this definitely satisfies the space and the show right now. But it'd be interesting to see a complete wall covered with these, like with a sort of methodically kind of gridded or kind of mapped out. And then next, I was thinking about Tracy Knowles Ross's work. There it is. Yeah. Thinking about her work, or this idea of kind of intersections, but I was really thinking about an overlapping of materials with this. And I think a lot about this too. I definitely, when I was a student, and I'm still a student, not forever a student, but thinking about like Eva Hesse's work, but kind of thinking about like process as content. And I really like this material combination. She was talking about, when I was speaking to her during her studio visit, she talks about like finding some of these materials in the, I think like in a creek kind of by her house, or on land, or on property. And I think that that's kind of an interesting thing to think about in terms of sculpture. It's kind of this journey aspect. I think a lot of artists too, I've seen installations that were a lot about like walking and mapping, like kind of being a collector and like organizing objects, or how you sort of know objects. So I kind of think these sort of fragmented shards, and even these sort of simple gestures about sort of like being really sort of sensitive and dialed into an environment, but finding these things that have lived histories. I think that's interesting. And then sort of juxtaposing those together, or putting them together in a sort of a unique hybridized form. I think that can be pretty fascinating. And then I like too how disparate some of the material combinations are, right? Like maybe there is kind of a similarity between something that's sort of rusted or jagged or organic. But even, I just think that that balancing act's interesting. I think too, as artists too, I think there's like a resourcefulness that we have. So you can buy your materials new for sure. But, a lot of sculptors do this, I know, or I'm guilty of it, is, I'm constantly, finding materials, finding discarded items. When I was a kid, I had this green and white metal detector, and the grandparents gave it to me for like Christmas or something like that. But I used it for years and years. Like I guess I was kind of a weird kid, but I remember kind of perfecting that low sweeping motion. You get the beep, and I never did really find a treasure, but I kind of found like a rusty hinge or a nail or something like that, kind of out in the landscape. And I think what was important was I was kind of reinterpreting my backyard. And I think artists do that. Like they reinterpret their backyard. They use things that are at hand. They're very resourceful. They're very adaptive. You can put them anywhere, and they can make work anywhere from whatever they need to. And I think that that's really interesting. And I was thinking too, there's a singer-songwriter named James Mcmurtry. Talks about childhood, and talks about kind of pretend, and he talks about play, and he talks about like getting lost in the backyard. But I do think that these sort of gestures like that are really significant. And I'm interested too in how she's combining this with figurative work too. So I think that this kind of push and pull and these sort of hybridized forms and incorporation of the figure, but also talking about kind of a sensitivity of place and an environment. And then, using kind of trash or debris or detritus to, it's kind of bittersweet, where there's maybe a beauty in the work, but then maybe talking about sort of problems, right? If you think about pollution or trash, or kind of thinking about maybe environmental issues too. So it's sort of double dipped, I guess I would say. And then I was kind of thinking about, in terms of the show too, intersections. I was thinking about Catherine Friend's work, because she has so this literal painting, kind of thinking of it literally too, in a way, like thinking about it, an actual intersection, right? And then, when you think about an intersection or a painting of intersections, right? Or painting of an intersection, you definitely see the hustling and bustling of the people. But you kind of think about maybe exchange of ideas. Maybe there's a conversation while you're waiting for the light to turn in the crosswalk so you can walk across the street. But I started thinking about, and I think within a lot of the work too, we were looking at Tracy's work earlier, but I was thinking about the idea of like the unmonumental, I guess I would say, and kind of a celebration of the banal or the everyday. And I think, someone that really captivates me is John Cage. And, looking at this work too, you might think about car horns, or you think about noise, right? Kind of public spaces like this. But now I think about John Cage, the performance that he did, the performance water walk, where he's using like everyday kind of domestic objects to make music. I think, that was so pivotal and like really amazing to me. Or even like some of John Tingley's work, where he's making these sort of machines that destroy themselves from like discarded materials and items or agricultural things. And I know I'm talking about sculpture, so I can't help but think of things maybe through sculpture sometimes. But, I'm thinking about like the idea of maybe John Cage. I think John Cage really celebrated like the banal and the everyday, right? Or these sort of everyday sort of like ritual things that we do, where like maybe it's like brushing your teeth or combing your hair or your commute to every day. I think those things are super interesting. And I think too, I'm talking about maybe thinking about some of the work too we've looked at. I think there's something to be said about this kind of like sensitivity to an environment or sensitivity to a place, and this sort of sensitivity to materials. Um, I think artists are very sensitive to those things. And I think too, this sort of vulnerability, I think is really interesting in the work, or and some of the ideas that I've been thinking about, maybe within my work or within teaching sculpture. And I'm guilty too of liking to make like large steel pieces. So I do make some pretty large, heavy things, but I'm really interested in the idea of like the unmonumental and the idea of kind of like fragmentation, and thinking about being like sensitive and like being vulnerable, like these things that a lot of people don't want to celebrate that I think are really important, right? That we should celebrate as artists. And then two, I'm thinking about, if we talk about like kind of like vulnerability and kind of like letting people in, I just is really grateful to Ground Floor Contemporary and all the artists that are there, letting me in your studios and talk about your work. And I realized that we were kind of talking earlier before before our Zoom meeting here. I don't know if it's quite a meeting, but earlier we're kind of talking about like letting people in the studio and kind of see the work. And it is kind of a vulnerable thing, but it's kind of it's a really kind of a beautiful thing. Like of course, I want to celebrate like art that is in the gallery, right? That the way the artist intends the work to be seen. But I've really been interested. I'm always kind of fascinated by the kind of the magic of the studio, and thinking about the parameters that artists work within. So these sort of parameters that we sort of set up for ourselves to work with. And sometimes those things are pretty ridiculous in a really kind of insightful way. So I think the way that we kind of gear our environment that we kind of work in, it's like crawling into someone's head. I don't know if it's like a Vulcan mind meld. Sorry, I've been watching Star Trek, but when I go in an artist studio, it's really interesting to see these things in process, right? Maybe we're talking about the potential of something, or maybe we're talking about something that hasn't been made yet. But that was what was so fun about kind of coming up with the theme or thinking about the idea of intersections, and then talking about work that maybe wasn't made yet or kind of was in process, right? But the kind of like willingness to like let someone in your studio or kind of in a private space and kind of hashing out ideas or talking about the work. I think it's kind of a beautiful thing. So some of it happened virtually on Zoom, but some of it was in person. But I'm just always fascinated by the studio too, and the environment of that studio and how rich and invigorating those places are, which Ground Floor is doing that in terms of the cooperative there. So I just think it's exciting. And, I've been here 5 years now, teaching at the University of Montevallo, and I've made several trips there to the gallery, but it's really been fun kind of over the years, kind of seeing everything that's kind of happening in those sort of individual studio spaces. So I think that's what it's all about, is that kind of community, right? I think with that, I know we have a couple artists that are going to speak about their work. So I'm interested to hear some of your thoughts and ideas.
Thank you, Tanner. That was an awesome introduction.
Oh, thank you.
So, yeah, it's always wonderful to hear other people's interpretation of, your own art. It's such an interesting experience to meld the ideas that have been living in your own mind and have them start to have a relationship with other people's thoughts and perceptions. So I'll talk briefly about my work. And both of these paintings are part of two different series I'm currently working on. And they came from me starting to take a lot of walks during quarantine and during the COVID period, into sort of starting to investigate the origins of Birmingham and its industrial past, and start to develop like a different relationship with the city, trying to understand the history since I grew up here. But I started in these walks to become fascinated with these found relics from iron and steel production, and how I was coming across them as being abandoned in the landscape and sort of showing up randomly without any explanation or attempt to sort of describe, their purpose or identity. And so it's almost like they've been kind of taken back by the wilderness. And there's sort of this invisible city with these bits and pieces from the past that's lying, and sort of my brain's trying to start to piece these things together. Um, the top image is from the Vulcan Trail, and I was drawn to it because of these two structures, and I didn't know what they were at the time, but after doing a little bit of research, they're these two stone trestles that are remnants from this railroad that used to run through the Vulcan Trail and also to Red Mountain. And it was called the Birmingham Mineral Railroad, and it connected different furnaces and mines throughout the region. But what's fascinating to me is not so much like the exact details of the history, but more how these things are appearing in the landscape, and kind of analyzing how they've been abandoned and sort of disowned, and left to be reclaimed by nature. And it's sort of revealing to me about how the psyche starts to show up in the landscape, and how sort of our own discomfort with our histories and stories about the city's past can kind of start to reveal itself in how we take care of these relics. And I'm also interested in this idea of erasure and abandonment of our own histories and the stories that happen to us in our own lives, and how we kind of subconsciously want to walk away from certain things. The painting in the bottom is part of another series that I'm calling Cracks and Caves. And I'm starting to explore these very vivid, overgrown spaces that don't have any sort of, they don't reveal any human interference, but they're full of life. And these cavernous spaces are sort of symbolic to me, as almost these spiritual um, portals and passageways for stepping into these kind of abandoned and unacceptable spaces, in ourselves, in our own internal landscapes, and also in the world around us. So sort of thinking about these cracks as like these gateway spaces. But I'm really looking at these cycles of death and rebirth in the landscape, and I'm drawn to these images because I feel like they're holding information that's important and interesting, because it feels forgotten and abandoned. And I sort of think that by starting to understand these shadows, it's also healing to kind of start to integrate these stories more into the collective consciousness. So that's kind of where I'm headed with these works. Mostly just interested in how the psyche starts to reveal itself in the landscape. So thank you for listening.
Hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Sarah Adkins Jablonski. So this work is called ABC. And before I talk about how I made it or what it means to me, I was just thinking about Tanner talking about the word intersections and what that means to me, like as an individual, and how I was moving forward with my art around the time of the call for this show. So when I think about like a literal intersection of two roads crossing, like that space where they cross is like an ecosystem of like that like little block of whatever, I don't know what a road's made of. I should probably know that, I'm a scientist. Like is both of the roads at the same time, but it's also its own space. And so when I think about like my own identity as an artist and a scientist, like those things come together. There's sort of these different roads for me, but they also exist as their own like ecosystem of thought and conversation at that intersection. And it's been, I think, a conversation I've been having with myself over the past several years, like how do I make artworks that that aren't just communicating science, or they're not just like communicating how I'm feeling about what art should be, but how do they exist in those spaces simultaneously at the same time in this like actual intersection. So it's sort of like a personal reflection I've been having about what my artwork like means to me, or like the spaces that it should be inhabiting. It's sort of both at the same time. But on a more social level, I think Artists Thrive has been important for me, thinking about how my artwork has a social justice tint to it. What am I trying to communicate? What communities am I trying to represent when I'm making art? And that ties a lot into the science that I'm currently doing at UAB, which I would love to talk about. So like a little lightning round talk about my academic work. So I'm working on a project that explores the microbiome of the soil in North Birmingham, and we're comparing basically the microbiome health of soil in a community, North Birmingham, to surrounding areas. We sort of suspect, and now that I'm working through a lot of that data, we see that there are differences in soil that have been influenced by contamination. So if you don't know the story of North Birmingham, it's basically situated near a lot of coke plants and industrial contamination. Is sort of like that. You're talking about like how Birmingham like is this huge industrial center, but it has disproportionately affected a lot of our Black neighbors. And so I think about like, how can I communicate that? I'm doing science in this soil, in this community, and even if I'm in some small ways partnering with certain members of North Birmingham, it's still something that I want to explore in the type of artwork that I'm making. So a lot of the artwork I've made up until this point, I do in the lab in Petri dishes. So I paint using bacteria, different colored bacteria that make really beautiful works of art. And I like that those exist at the intersection of science and art, right? The Petri dish is like the symbol of the scientific lab, but the works themselves are drawings or paintings using colorful bacteria. But I thought it would be a disservice to paint something using the bacteria about North Birmingham. I think instead I wanted to sort of construct a narrative of thought using fragments of old photos I've used. So this is a digital sort of scrapbook of a telling of all of the different things I'm thinking about North Birmingham. So I use one of the images that the Petri dish itself is a cutout of another image I've used for a different Petri dish artwork. So it's sort of like paying homage to some of my previous works while being filled with a picture from a site that I've collected dirt in. And then it's layered on top of the letters ABC in reference to the ABC coke plant that does a lot of, that is responsible for almost all of the contamination in North Birmingham. And so this work, I think it means a great deal to me in many different ways. But most notably, it's a way for me to communicate my science while also reconstructing how I think about myself as an artist. And I'm really, just I guess as a side note, I was really excited that this work sold because I was thinking intently about donating all of the proceeds to organizations that I'd love to make you aware about. One is GASP, and the other is PANIC, People Against Neighborhood Contamination in Neighborhood Industrial Contamination in North Birmingham. I think not just communicating about artwork or science work, but I'm trying to continually consider how my artwork outlives this exhibition space. So something else I thought the person who purchased it just sort of liked that it said ABC, which were the initials of someone in their family. So I sort of like, I mean, we're talking about interpretation of artwork, like this is so heavy to me scientifically and artistically, but it's just sort of cool that it's interpreted in different ways. But I am sort of reconstructing how I think about artworks outliving my thought or outliving just sort of what I'm representing in my science or art. So yeah, thank you for listening.
Hello, I'm Tara. Thank you so much, Tanner. for curating this show and giving me an opportunity to try to work in 3 dimensions. I'm a novice for sure. Because I get nervous and I tend to ramble, I wrote up something that I consider a draft because it will never be finished, just like it's hard to finish art. But it's a start, and it's where my thoughts were when I put this together. Often I rarely know when I start creating something. It starts with some sort of meditation or a picture, a photograph, or something that I'm thinking about. So Tanner, I don't think I had a great conversation with you about where I was going because I didn't know. But it was something I was working with and wanted to explore more, and took the opportunity of the 3D element. So here I go. The title is 1 Million Parites. This is an unfinished chanting book or scroll. It's a timeline and an autobiography. It's a vulnerable work in progress. 2 handmade paper books were used, each made years before, and each unbound and reassembled as one by rudimentary hand stitching using threads that once belonged to my maternal grandmother. Highlighted in the center is an image from a 1996 stay in Panama, a significant point in my life's narrative. When my 26-year-old self, along with my soon-to-be fiance and now ex-husband, intersected with my 70-year-old great uncle Stoney, a missionary to Panama, a Baptist missionary nonetheless, his 26-year-old Panamanian wife. So if you heard that, she was 26 and I was 26 and he was 70. Her name is Betsy, and their 4 beautiful children. Betsy is not the woman pictured in the image. It's a snapshot, though, of another Kuna, a Panamanian mother, a Kuna, and her 2 boys taken on San Blas Island, Panama. Hanging above is a small round landscape in a black velvet frame of a now unforgotten place somewhere in Western Europe. Both images reference memory and tradition, mothering, being a parent, being a mother, and all that motherhood entails, mending, sewing, peace and love, paradise and heaven, and even trauma. The wooden base, which is also elementary in its design and construction, I did not make it, I found it. It resembles to me a child-sized podium or even a pulpit. But it's a foundation from which to try and communicate, to try to articulate something. The title is a direct reference to the Hayakumado Dharani, or the 1 million pagodas and Dharani prayers, which I learned about in a visit to the Robin C. Williams Paper Museum in Atlanta. These prayers are one of the first examples of Japanese printing on paper, a result of a royal decree by the Empress Shotoku in 770 AD. She ordered the printing of 1 million paper prayers, each enshrined in its own wooden pagoda. Constructed as symbolic offerings, the pagodas were divided evenly among the 10 major temples of the area. There are various theories around her motives, some political, but it's a fantastic and dramatic tale. Nonetheless, I fell in love with the idea of 1 million prayers. In exploring more, I learned that Dharani were esoteric, short Buddhist prayers to be constantly repeated or worn inside little pockets, something that leads to a charmed life. Researching Dharani led to the word Parita and introduced me to Parita chanting books. Parita is generally translated as protection or safeguard, and refers to the Buddhist practice of reciting certain verses and scriptures in order to ward off misfortune or danger, as well as to the specific verses and discourses recited as Parita text. My stitches not only serve to hold and to mend, but are tangible prayers for all of this world. The stitches are intuitive, rhythmic, and authentic. They are meditations on hope and truth in visual form. They feel intentional and purposeful. The repetition increases skill, as I'm learning to sew, as well as empathy, and leads to physical and emotional strength. The handmade abaca sheets are dyed with natural elements like rust and walnuts and rain, and even sat out during the recent tornadoes. They are sun-dried and bleached. They are rubber stamped with little houses made by my 2 children at a birthday party years ago. All of this is tangible truth, and it's authentic. The book and its evolution are also directly influenced by African artist El Anatsui, I never know how to pronounce his name, forgive me, and his Broken Pot series. The idea of breaking or trauma, not as an end, but as a beginning. Things, or perhaps people, have to break in order to start reshaping. So that's it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Miriam Omra, and these are my 4 pieces. They're Polaroid 600 film transferred onto watercolor paper. I'm not a photographer, but I use photography in a lot of my work. I consider myself a textile artist, but I always come back to photography as a starting point, either through using found photography, actually using the physical photographs, or using them as the base for my weavings and portraits that I do, or you looking at family photographs. I've realized that there's an intersection between some of my photography, this photography work, and my woven work, where I think there's a sense of control and chance, or choice and chance in the creation of how I work in whatever media I'm working in. Within my weaving, I have a process of taking a piece apart and putting it back together, and there's a shift that happens, and I start off with dye painting an image, and it shifts as I recreate it. And the same similar thing happens with these Polaroid transfers. I have a particular image that I'm taking. It's kind of recording a moment or a time or space, but it's also, there's an element of chance when I create the transfer. The emulsion itself starts to fall apart. The color changes as the chemicals kind of come out in the water. The pieces fall apart a bit, and it becomes something different from the original photograph. The other thing I think about photography is often considered a fact or a document that's unchangeable, but it's not. It's very much a selected view of the world, and it's not a neutral medium as sometimes people think it is. And these kind of came out of like a diary or a recording the last year through space and a smaller world than I was living in previous years. So some of these images are from close to my house, just walking around, and some of them are close to the gallery. So those have been the two places that I've existed in this last year. And so there's 2 that are from the close to the gallery and 2 from close to home. And that's kind of where this work, I'm still in process of fully understanding what I'm doing with this and where it's coming out of. But I think that's, a lot of us are in that phase right now.
Thanks so much, everybody. We can go ahead and open it up to questions if you'd like. I'll stop sharing and bring us back forward so we can all see each other. Is there anybody that wants to jump in? Sarah?
So I have a question for Sarah Atkins. You know, when you were talking about your piece, do you think that there should be a sort of statement about what you're dealing with on the back of it? Not, you know, you wouldn't see it, it would be in the back of the frame.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's weird to like, as a young person, I always think about my images as attached to like Instagram captions. But I think that's a really good idea to like include sort of the background or the outlook of why the work like matters, or sort of what I want to be able to do with it.
And what you're doing, what you're saying, you know, and I think that Miriam, you know, I think a lot of people could do that, but I think for me, Sarah's was, you know, maybe you and Miriam would be some, I don't know, but I really did.
I had a question for Tanner. All right, when we had all dropped off our work and it was in a big state of disarray, and I thought, oh my, you know, how can this come together? And Tanner, I would love to know how in the world, I'm in awe of what you did with this show. And what was your process as far as turning it into something so enjoyable?
Well, thanks so much. I think it's just sort of jumping in with both feet. You know, I talked about like being in the studio and kind of like that process and investigation and journey through materials when you're making things, but it's kind of the same thing in the gallery. Sometimes when I'm installing my work in a space, I'll take my shoes off and kind of feel the gallery and my socks on. But it is kind of like that, sort of like knowing the space, it not being in a hurry and just kind of saying it might take, you know, a couple days or several hours, but mainly it's just sort of like being a kid. I guess that kind of childlike sensitivity and sensibility. It's nothing that's like, you know, you're kind of using like the lizard part of your brain, like what's on the brain stem, but it's moving things around, thinking about things in terms of like grouping, like do the pieces compete or do they complement each other? Maybe the color palettes and two pieces are too similar, or maybe they work well together. I guess formally it's kind of reading the work and then thinking about things in terms of like scale and relationship, and then with physicality of the body, how the body moves through space too. It's just kind of moving things around, and then I guess being willing to kind of move it again and again, kind of pressing the edit button. But if you put something on the wall, you know, move it again. And then too, there's multiple people in the gallery when we're installing. So I think we're kind of bouncing ideas off each other, having someone kind of back up and look at something, right? But I think I guess the magic is just kind of being in the moment when you're kind of installing the work. Like you don't want one piece blocking the other piece. And you just kind of want them, I guess I'm thinking of it in terms of like chapters in a book, or you know, people don't listen to CDs or albums as much because they have it on shuffle, but it's kind of important to listen to all the songs in the album, not like the greatest hits. But I think the work kind of flows in a way like that. So Sarah was just here with Daisy in our new gallery space, pool gallery here at the University of Montevallo. But we kind of did that in that space, didn't we, Sarah?
We did.
Yeah, kind of moving things around. It's kind of like, I'm not a musician, but it's kind of like you're in a band where you got like, what do you got? Like you got the bass going, and then you got like, so like it's sort of trying to figure out. Yeah. It's kind
we
of,
were all making the show. It was fun because it was, yeah.
Well, thank you, Tanner, so much.
Thanks. And that's definitely a challenge too. I think that's kind of the beauty about group shows is there's kind of the unexpected that happens with maybe how you set the work up, having an idea, but also like being able to respond to the space and place, right? I know Elaine did like a site specific installation, right? So I think, yeah, it's being prepared, but also kind of like getting the right radio station that not physically, but or like the radio stations out here are terrible. I don't know if some better. But I was just thinking about like whatever you got to tune into to do it right. So yeah.
And I'll just add that going back to Montevallo in that space, because it was just the three of us, but we were actually, now Daisy's work is much more complete, as an entity than mine. And we were sort of making my work. I had parts, and that was a really interesting, because after we did the corner, we couldn't have just hung blah, blah. It just didn't seem, and all these drawings out on the floor. So it became, oh no, let's do something a little different here.
Yeah.
So thank you, and Daisy.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I guess I've talked about sort of this like search and discovery, but I think once we got your stuff on the wall, I think you said the work isn't finished until it's up, or you said something that was good.
Well, particularly there, it wasn't. It got finished there.
Not finished until it's in the gallery.
And the other strange thing is that last week I tried hanging the flat ones, taking the picture and putting it in the studio. Of course, the wall is a different size. So of course it didn't work quite like that. So, you had to shift.
Yeah.
And we'll see. I'm going to hang the other paper ones, and I'm sure they'll shift too.
Anybody else?
I have a comment. I don't really know that it's fully developed, but looking at all the work and then also hearing some of the artists talk about their work, that to me there's something about that everyone's in a kind of a stage or state of reflection within their work, that the development of the work is in some cases still in process. Even if it's a body of work or style of work that the artists have been working in for a long time, there's just something that's in reflection and in process and development, and that's my comment.
That could also have a lot to do with the moment in time where we are as a world.
Yeah, I think thinking about the context of when and how we create our work, I was also thinking about the canon of art history is so wide, but also we exist in the canon of daily life. And so while some of the artwork an artist may not reference or think about art history and that canon, whether you think about what is going on, you're still part of that discussion and part of that unknowingly, that there's all this, again, these intersections of different things and different layers that are happening.
I guess to add to that, something that I noticed both Tara and Miriam say was to like qualify your medium by saying like, oh, I don't normally work in this medium. Or Tara was like, I'm not a sculptor. And Miriam, you were like, I'm not a photographer, but look at my 4 photographs. And I guess I'm wondering if y'all can speak to, maybe not why you, well, I guess why did you decide to like qualify that with that? I mean, I understand your identity as artist is maybe rooted in the mediums that you're more used to. But where do you see yourself? Like, do you feel like you may ever identify with that medium, or is this sort of like the first step for you, or you just needed to say that in order to overcome it? Or
Miriam, do you want to go?
Sure. So for me, I think it's partly in the formal education of my art education. I formally trained in fiber and material studies, so I have that I feel like I have a platform to stand on. Whereas photography, which I think is a very technical field, it's something that I've always been interested in, but I've never taken any classes. So it's always been my own self-exploration. I guess that doesn't qualify me less as a photographer, but there's something in my mind that does. So that's an interesting thing. I think it's just also a subconscious aspect of what I feel qualified to do or say.
Sarah, I think that's a great question, Sarah. And I actually, typed this up for today because I go in every direction about everything. And I left that in there on purpose because I tried to write like I sew and just what do you want to say? And that came out first for very similar reasons, but also because I'm not proud of it as a piece. Like it's not a strong work of art. And so maybe there's that, and here we have this 3D, professor, and that speaks a lot to my personality about wanting to do a good job. But I want to try, but I know I'm not good, but I want the opportunity because it's growth and it pushes me in a direction that I wouldn't normally go in. And so how do I try to communicate visually? And now speaking about it, how do I do that and also create something that's not familiar as far as, I've always worked with books, which are dimensional, but it's a book. It's a Western book, you flip it from left to right. But there's so many different versions of books and how that feeds into sculpture even, and then narrative. So I just feel incompetent, I feel like and I use the word rudimentary for a reason too. Like I'm really tapped into the child sense of things in so many ways, and I'm glad for that. But I didn't teach kids in 2020 for the first time in almost 20 years, and I realized, oh my gosh, they taught me, because now that I'm on my own making artwork, I can do whatever I want, and I feel like it is like mud pie. I mean, just oh my gosh, this is so fun. I don't have to, there are no rules. I'm not formally trained in art. But I also am adult enough to know the vulnerability, because within the art community, even still, there's a lot of what people want to know, or what they'll read is, what are your credentials? Where are you coming from? And how do you, in a sense, like prove that what you're doing, I don't know, it's that professional side of things too. So this environment here is safe. It speaks to that childish self that I have, that I feel I can be vulnerable, and I know I'm going to grow from it. And this is so painful right now to like to have to speak and talk about it. But I don't know, it was something I wanted to explore personally, knowing I didn't feel like I could produce something extraordinary, but it was a great process for me.
So I want to add something to both of those. Miriam, I think it's really interesting that you said about a fiber artist and photography and it being technical, and you are not using it. You are not doing the photography technical. That's just not what's in your work. And I think today our schools and our programs are now deciding that people are in studio art. They're not a painter or a sculptor or a printmaker. You're an artist. And it's taken a long time to get here. And I think that's what, but we still have all that luggage on our head about that, a fiber or a painter or whatever. And I think, Tara, you're having that, what's your CV or what is this or that, the credentials. And I also think it's interesting that you talked about that it wasn't a really great piece. I think it's what you did is a really good piece. I think you have to take a deep breath. Just because you were nervous about it doesn't mean that it might not be a really good piece. And Tana, you've got to talk to us a minute.
Yeah. I think it's interesting conversation. I think that now, I think in terms of like, I feel like things are getting more interdisciplinary, right? And I guess the first thing I would say is that there kind of are no rules, right? I mean, if you're using a table saw, there's rules to how you use a table saw. So you keep your fingers in terms of teaching sculpture, right? But when I talk about a table saw, I think of it in terms of my students, like, I think about Agnes Martin, but you can use a table saw for mark making, or you could use a table saw as, I could take a 4x4 post and make it look like a piece of bread with a miter saw. Says my internet connection's unstable, but I think I'm all right. I guess what I'm saying is, like, it used to be, I don't know if it used to, I was thinking maybe from my undergrad experience, which was a great experience that I had, but some disciplines have holdovers that get in the way, I think, and that's just kind of my opinion on it. I'm not trying to like stir anything up, but like, with printmaking, if the paper's wrinkled or if it's torn, or if there's like a ink that's smeared on the bottom, like that's a big no-no, right? It's not perfect. And then within conferences too, there's, I would say that those holdovers are probably more specific to conferences, or kind of, whether it's a show that's all about print or all about like wood-fired pots, right? Or even like if there's a crack in the pot or this or that. I guess I think the important thing is what the artwork's doing and what it's communicating is what you should just be more concerned about that. As long as you have a sense of like focus and clarity with the work, and it's telling you something, I think that's kind of the real breathing thing you got to kind of focus on, maybe. But I do think that there's something about trying something new and it being awkward and kind of like vulnerable too. But I kind of think that's the point of I think ground floor, or that kind of cooperative that y'all are a part of, that y'all can kind of do those things too, kind of try things out. And then maybe Tara, like maybe then you get a show at a museum and you have work that's based, a whole body of work based off what you're kind of trying out right now, right? So I think that there's something to be said about like trying it and figuring it out. And I guess too, there are some differences definitely between like disciplines or areas. So I think, I think a lot of times when we think about sculpture, we think about here-ness, and we think about kind of a physicality to it. And then some people in a gallery, some viewers in a gallery, are completely unaware of sculpture. They acknowledge the presence of sculpture, but it's sort of like a broke down car in someone's yard. Like you lean against it, you might have a conversation around it, like it's a physicality, but they can't interact with it. And some people do interact with sculpture, but sculpture is kind of maybe an oddball sometimes. But I feel like sculpture is kind of more about a here-ness, right? It's kind of like a body that's in space, right? It's all about how the body interacts with space. And, I'm not making rules now. I talked about like breaking boundaries and stuff like that. But a lot of times when we think about maybe photography and painting, and not often, oftentimes, but not every time, of course, but, I think about painting or photo being like
Did we lose him?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Oh, no.
He'll probably come back. He's just frozen for you guys too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I hate this mid-thought he got cut off.
He was
was
on a roll too.
Oh, we lost him.
Boy.
Oh wait, there we go. Yay. Hi, Tanner.
But I guess I was talking about, I don't know how much got cut off, but I was talking about there are some differences between like genres and materials and things that have holdovers, but it's kind of knowing like what works and what doesn't work, right? So like with sculpture, something that kind of irritates me sometimes, now that I'm going to talk about things that bother me within sculpture, within a discipline. But if you see something sticking off of a painting, like if you have something that's square and then there's a bunch of things hanging off of it, like you should really like look at Lee Bontecue's work or Eva Hesse, right? And think about like 1960s. They're talking about the conversation between like drawing and painting, right? So I think knowing your histories, but if you kind of like kind of flip through our history books and kind of familiarize yourself with the timeline, you can jump wherever you want on the timeline. It's a Mobius strip that's turning in on itself. So I think that's where we are right now. So.
I had a couple of things, if I could make a couple of comments. It's interesting that we're having this conversation because Miriam, you've been such a big influence on a lot of things that I try and do. And I've only just this past year, for me in a positive light, realized I don't say I'm a photographer anymore because that feels constraining, even though I work a lot with photography. I feel so much freer just saying I'm an artist, and I use photography because conversations I have around photography shift now. They're not about the technicalities as much as the creativity and the explorations within photography. So that's just interesting, thinking about this need to protect myself against sculpture, like that feels really foreign. And so it's just kind of, I hadn't thought about that until this very moment. So I love that you're exploring photography. You've got a freedom about it that I am only just really discovering, because I felt so locked in to what photography meant from a technical point of view. So, yeah.
I want to jump in real quick. I just love that we're able to have these conversations with each other. It's so special, and that we're able to share like these different veins that are new and that we're discovering, because I feel like it's in those sort of chance moments that really cool things happen. Tara, you always unlock so much for me, like something about your artist brain. I get so excited every time we have conversations. But I've been taking notes throughout everything people have been saying, feeling really inspired by different things. So thanks, everyone.
Yeah, I think these little group shows are extraordinary because you can do something and shift your practice a little bit and experiment with it and get it out of the studio and see it in the real space and be vulnerable. Because if it's just saved within your own enclosure, you don't experience it fully. And so I think pretty much everybody did something a little bit different too, even if it was just a small shift, on paper for Liza or color with Elaine, it's just a new, different step. And you're also not as vulnerable, in your own show with your own wall, you can kind of just do something and see, okay, this works or it doesn't work. But I enjoyed everybody's pieces. Sarah, I think that your Petri dish, you kept that, the impression of the Petri dish on your piece this time, and you took it away last time. And I really enjoyed the Petri dish image in it. When you cut that out of the work last time, I missed it, so that was my thought on yours. And everybody else's work too. I think they were just absolutely spectacular. So is there anything else, or should we wrap? I think we're good. We've gone an hour and 6 minutes. So we did a really good job, you guys. Thanks so much to the artists for coming today and talking about their work. And Tanner, a huge thank you from all of us.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Tanner. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanner.
Thank you.
Thank y'all so much.
Yeah.
And
so nice to get to work with an outside artist.
Yes.
And to hear thoughts, from them and get that feedback. So really enjoyable.
it's been a lot of fun, and I look forward to what y'all do in the future with other shows. Yeah, so that's always fun too. It's always an evolving, changing thing.
Oh,
That's great.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for coming.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Y'all have a good rest of the day.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.